Well, good morning and welcome as we enter our last week of these Lent reflections. It seems impossible that we are only a few days and to wait until Easter. Many years ago, we were in Canada for Canada Day, and in Ottawa there was a party that went on all night with fireworks. The streets of Ottawa were heaving. The following morning, really early, you couldn't tell that there had been a huge party in the city at all. The streets were completely clean. There was no litter, no drinks cans, no signs of people having had too much alcohol. Everything was quiet and tidy, as if nothing had actually happened the night before. And it made me wonder what Jerusalem would have been like following the triumphal entry. Everyone would have gone home, the streets would have been cleaned, and I suspect people would have been wondering, making comments about the finery that the governor and Pilate and what they were all wearing and the accoutrements on the horse and the size of the military parades. And they would have been commenting on that other parade that Richard mentioned, a young rabbi riding a donkey, in total contrast to the trappings of empire in the other procession. And we can imagine the conversations. And in the cold light of morning, people would have asked over the breakfast table, well, has it made a difference? Is anything going to change? And that leads to the problem. We all want the world to be a better place. But when we look at things that happen in the news, we don't always want to be part of it. We've seen in recent weeks the peaceful protests following Sarah Everard's death and the Bristol riot. And yet what's interesting is that the newspapers are reporting a different story, that a lot of the violence actually came from the police rather than from the people. Who do we believe? The police have had to retract their statement that they had suffered broken bones because they didn't. It was a lie. But it fed into the idea that we have to blame someone. And that's the problem. We always want someone to blame. When the world is not as we want it to be, we have to think, well, whose fault is it? Scroll down my notes a little bit. It's interesting, this idea of a blame culture, we think, oh, it's a new thing. But we've always done it. We've always blamed someone else. There is René Girard, a philosopher, said that we have a scapegoat mechanism in our society. Basically, it's we compare ourselves with others. We see that the world isn't as we want it. We contrast. And then we start to criticize. And then we start to condemn. And eventually it will lead to crucifixion. It's a scapegoating mechanism where anyone else is to blame rather than ourselves. And tied with this, there is the myth of redemptive violence. If we get rid of the other, then all will be well. But the trouble is, it is a myth. Violence never begets peace. Violence always begets violence. So Jerusalem, the day after the procession. Has anything changed? No, not really. The Romans are still in charge. The temple is still, in the view of many, corrupt. The people are still not free. So what are they going to do? I don't think the people of Jerusalem just turned like that against Jesus. I think they thought about it. They looked at the world, saw that it hadn't changed, and looked at who could they make as a scapegoat. And they chose Jesus. It was easier to choose and follow and condemn something that was different than to condemn the status quo. And so they demanded the crucifixion. I was reading this week that it wasn't God that demanded the violent torture and crucifixion of an innocent man. It was humanity that demanded that violence. Because God didn't need Jesus to die so that he could forgive us. Forgiveness is part of God's DNA. God chose to forgive. We've only got to read the Psalms to realize how God is a forgiving God. As the writer Brian Zahnd says, the crucifixion is not what God inflicts upon Jesus in order to forgive. The cross is what God endures in Christ as he forgives. God in Christ absorbs all the violence that humanity has to offer. And rather than scapegoating like we do, God chooses to forgive, chooses love. So as we step a day closer towards Good Friday, we are still left with the question, which procession into Jerusalem are we going to follow? The status quo, with all the trappings of empire, success, power? Or are we going to follow a different path? A subversive path of non-violent peace? Even if that path leads to a cross. But then we know that beyond the cross lies resurrection. A final thought. G.K. Chesterton, the author, wrote in an article to a newspaper that was asking what is wrong with the world, and he famously wrote, "I am." It's only when we recognize our own part in what's wrong with the world, rather than scapegoating others, that maybe the world can be changed into a better place, when we realize and take responsibility for our own actions. So be blessed as we step a day closer to Good Friday and to the wonders of Easter, and we'll see you again tomorrow. Bye-bye.